Hi all! I'm back to do another reading from Daughters of Fire and Sea. Sorry for missing last week. My kids got sick and I got sick, so I wasn't able to record. But now I'm back and feeling good, so let's do the next chapter. We last read chapter 8, and that ended with finding Runa's body in the Vale and jumping through the window out of the Vale and landing who knows where. So let's find out what happens. Okay, so if you have just found this video and you haven't been listening to the earlier chapters, you can find the link below to jump back and start the story from the beginning, so you know what's going on. Chapter 9, Runa. Pain exploded through Runa's head, and she closed her eyes, throwing an arm over her face to shield herself from the light. She cracked open an eyelid, tears leaking down her face into her hair, and tried to focus on the brilliance above her. There was something against her back, soft but firm, shifting as she moved. Eyes finally focusing, Runa realized she was looking into the sun. She gaped. The sky was an unbelievable shade of dazzling blue. Someone moved next to her, and Runa tilted her head to the side, still shading her eyes. It was their mother, shoving herself upright. Elena swayed unsteadily and raised her hand, facing the opening in the air. The veil, Runa thought. I was falling, and... Lyric and Kel tumbled through the rippling hole and slammed against the sand. Gasping, Runa pulled her legs away, scrambling up. She swayed, waves of nausea bringing tears to her eyes. Her body felt unfamiliar, sluggish. She could see inside the window and the room beyond. The faces of the Cyrene men were angry and coming closer. The unsettling weight of their magic flared out, the scream trying to break inside Runa's head. Grabbing something off her belt, Elena tossed it through the opening. Light exploded, blinding Runa, and she cried out, shielding her eyes as black spots danced across her vision. Elena shouted the mage rune for unraveling, the same one she'd taught Runa before they'd rushed into the room. There was an audible crack, loud and final, and the pressure vanished. The Cyrene's shouts cut off, and silence fell, heavy as a blanket. Sound slowly returned to Runa's ears, her own tired gasps and a groan from someone nearby. Runa lowered her hand and cautiously opened her eyes, letting awareness flare out around her. Their breathing was not the only sound here. She could hear the rush of water. Squinting past their mother, now bent forward, hands on her knees, Runa saw a massive expanse of water stretching away from them. Was it a lake? Where was the opposite shore? She watched the white-foamed water surge onto the black sand. This was an ocean, wasn't it? Runa had never seen one before, but she'd heard about the Sea of Screams on Aerith's eastern edge and Habaria's Heart in the west. Which one was this? A gull cried somewhere high overhead, and Runa looked into the sky, wincing as light stabbed down into her skull. Everything was too intense, too vivid. It felt like she'd never been inside her own body before, never used her eyes. Runa wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, tasting bile. She spat into the sand and wished for water. She couldn't drink the sea, could she? Lyric, lying on her side a short distance from Runa, sat up with a groan and reached out to Kel, who was lying beside her. They helped each other stand. It's gone, Lyric said, looking down the beach. Elena waved a hand. I closed it. She sounded exhausted and sat down as Runa watched, her legs crumpling beneath her. I just need a minute, their mother said, breathing in and out. I thought they were going to follow us through. Lyric's voice was shaky, uncertain. My eyeballs were vibrating in my skull. We're safe, for now, Elena said. They won't know which beach we're on. She didn't sound certain. Runa straightened, eyes still narrowed, her lids attempting to block out the light. She looked around. Black sand stretched out of sight in both directions and mounded into dunes to her right, speckled with silvery clumps of long, thin grass. Beyond the dunes spread watery marshland that rolled to the far dark edge of a forest. At least that's what Runa thought the green smudge was in the distance. She was staring west, wasn't she? If so, then this was the Sea of Screams. Where are we? Lyric asked. She had an arm around Kel's waist. Runa eyed him. There was a bruise on Kel's jaw, and one eye was turning black. He must have fought the men in the room. She hadn't seen it herself. She'd barely seen anything at all but the shape of her body lying on the chaise. Kel was staring past her up the coast. He seemed disquieted, his face drained of color. "We're in Thenda," he said, his voice thin. He held on to Lyric, as though afraid she'd drift away, and reached up to the tattoo around his throat. It shifted in color, and he swallowed, pain crossing his face. Runa blinked. Had she seen Kel's tattoo move? "The tainted shore?" Lyric asked, breathing the words. Runa looked away from Kel's throat to the north. She didn't see anything foreboding, just black sand stretching away from them. "We have to cross it to get to Rendishar?" Lyric asked. Elena stood up, her movements slow, tired. "We can head south to Olaporia. We'll regroup, decide what to do." Kel looked at her, a frown creasing the skin between his brows. "We need to go to Hrothgar's hold," Lyric said. "You promised Kel." "The books will still be there if we take time to rest," Elena said. Lyric narrowed her eyes and straightened, looking determined. "We already discussed this, Mama." Runa's chin lifted proudly as Lyric faced their mother. "Yes," she thought, "you won't control us. You won't tell us what to do." Elena sighed, her eyes moving between Lyric and Runa. "Your grandfather is not going to welcome you with open arms. There will be no cozy reunion, no celebration in your honor, no loving meeting of family. Going there, to him, means giving up your lives, your freedom." "You don't know that, Mama." Lyric put her hand on Kel's chest possessively. "We're going to help Kel, and we're going to talk to Grandfather." Their mother's eyes shifted to Runa, hopeful and pleading. "I don't care if we meet him or not," Runa said, "but I don't want this war hanging over our heads, controlling what we do, shaping our lives. I want to be free of it, and that means getting involved." Elena swore and turned away, scrubbing a hand through her hair. She looked at the ocean for a long moment. Back straightening, their mother faced them, her hair blazing like fire in the sun. She didn't look defeated. "Let me first take you to a friend, your Uncle Elladan. He's Sireni, but he'll help us. He can get us to Hrothgar's hold safely." Runa looked at Lyric. She didn't like feeling hunted. Maybe their uncle could offer protection against the Sireni chasing them. Going south couldn't hurt. "All right," she said, seeing agreement in her sister's eyes. "Where is he?" "We can contact him from Yanessa," their mother said. "It's a port town south of us, on Olaporia's border." She looked at Kel. "I will still honor our agreement, but I won't put my daughters in undue danger. You can continue if you wish, and we'll meet you there. You don't have to stay with us." Her eyes flickered coldly. Was she mad at Kel? "I don't need you to watch over them anymore." Kel looked repentant, shoulders slumping. "I'll stay with you," he said. Lyric flushed, a pleased glow in her eyes. Looking at Lyric, Elena's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Did she disapprove of their interest in each other? Why? Their mother bent and picked up Runa's pack, holding it out. Runa took it reflexively, momentarily overwhelmed by sensation as she felt the rough strap slide against her skin. She looked up as she slipped the pack onto her shoulder and found their mother staring at her. "How do you feel?" Elena asked. "Fine." Their mother raised an eyebrow. "Fine?" Runa flushed, feeling petulant. Annoyed with her own emotion, she held their mother's gaze despite the heat in her face. "Everything feels new and overwhelming." Elena nodded. "Did you unravel your spell before joining your body?" "No." Runa thought back to how it felt, the faint but persistent pull towards herself, the strangeness of staring at her own face, devoid of life, of expression. She'd wanted to abandon her body and drift away, though she was unsure to where or why. Runa didn't know where the desire had come from. She wanted to be alive, didn't she? Runa shoved aside the question. Of course she did. She was young, had barely experienced anything at all. Her life could not be over yet, not before she did something important, something meaningful. Not before she was powerful, strong. Besides, Runa couldn't leave Lyric now, not while she was vulnerable. And what about the daughters and their mysterious omen? Had they meant Lyric or Kel? Runa had always believed there was truth in the old stories, in the gods and creatures who'd shaped their world. She'd offered prayers like everyone else, shown respect in case the Trinity was still watching and meddling unseen. However, unlike Lyric, she'd always thought the gods weren't interested in Aerith anymore, that they'd abandoned them, had walked away, just like Elena. But their mother had come back. Runa chewed on her lip, considering. What if the gods weren't as far away as everyone thought? What if they lurked out of sight, like the daughters in the Vale? "Do we follow the beach?" Lyric asked, drawing Runa back to the present. Yes, Elena said. There's a well-traveled road west of us, on the other side of the marshlands, but unfortunately we can't reach it. She gestured up the bog, visible through a gap in the dunes. It looked like a maze of reed-spiked mounds, treacherous islands surrounded by black water. As Runa watched, the water rippled near a rise nearby, something long and scaled sliding into the inky slough. We'll have to keep to the sand, their mother said. Sleep under the stars. Yanessa can't be more than a day or two. She glanced at Kel, who nodded. I don't recognize exactly where we are, he said, but the water and beach are clean, free of the taint, so we must be close to Thenda's southern border. What does it look like? Lyric asked. The taint. Green, Elena said. It glows, pulsing like stars are trapped inside. There's nothing natural about it. You'll know it when you see it. The daughters of Aelin came to Runa's mind, and she recalled how their runes glinted green on their arms. Were they poisoned in some way, like the shore? Was that even possible, for an immortal being to be infected? If you see it, Kel said, don't touch it. His eyes were serious, haunted. Don't touch the water or anything that's come in contact with it. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that, Elena said. Once in Yanessa, we can join the northern road or sail north on Elodin's ship. She set down her pack and rummaged inside. Examining her water, their mother unwrapped the cheese and dried meat and removed a single apple from her bag. She dumped all 3 on the ground. Everything is spoiled. Check your bags and dump any food you have left. Curiously, Runa pulled her bag off her shoulder and opened it, looking at her untouched food. Everything was tinted purple. Her stomach flipped, the skin prickling on the back of her neck. Turning her bag out, she dropped it all without touching it. Mine too, she said. We're out of food? Lyric asked. We're also low on water. She went silent and Runa glanced at her. Lyric had stepped away from Kel and was staring west. Her lips moved and she mumbled inaudibly, then nodded. Runa raised an eyebrow. I think I can help, Lyric said, smiling. Gandara just told me a spell to strip salt from seawater. Her brow furrowed as she looked at the ocean. Are we sure the water's safe here? Free from the taint, I mean. Yes, Kel said, following Lyric's gaze. If the taint were here, you'd see and smell it. We should fish and try to catch crabs before we head south. We won't be able to buy food until Yanessa. I agree, Elena said, grudgingly. Eleonora? Runa asked softly, looking around. If Lyric was being spoken to by their ancestor outside the Vale, then Eleonora might be nearby too. She disliked the hawk-eyed woman's apparent ability to appear unannounced and unwanted, but Runa wanted to ask her, no, demand, what had happened with the fire rune. Had it been a test, a cruel trick? Had Eleonora expected her to fail? Eleonora? Runa repeated. Eleonora didn't answer or appear, and Runa, having nothing to direct her anger at, glared at the ocean. Kel set down his pack beside Elena. They began debating the best way to fish in the shallow water off the beach. Lyric gathered up their water skins and carried them to the ocean. She stopped just shy of the rolling sea and, dropping them onto the sand, pulled off her boots and stockings, then tied up her dress to keep it from getting wet. Her ankles were pale in contrast to the black sand, and she stepped into the surf, gasping and giggling as the water rushed across her feet. Rue, you've got to feel this, Lyric called over her shoulder. Despite her mood, Runa had to admit her curiosity. She stripped off her boots, tying her dress up like her sister, then walked to the edge of the water. Hesitating for only a moment, she walked onto the wet sand toward the approaching waves. Water rushed her, foaming and tumbling. Runa gasped as it hit her skin, insistent as it swirled around her feet and calves. The cold was exhilarating, refreshing. Arms lifting by her sides, she lifted her chin and let the sunlight warm her face. It felt wonderful. Hold this? Lyric asked. Runa opened her eyes, looking down, as Lyric shoved 2 water skins into her hands. Her sister bent over, filling her own with water, then traded it for the others. Once she'd refilled them all, Lyric smiled at Runa and carried the water skins back to the beach. Twisting at the waist, Runa watched her sister kneel on the sand, away from the tide's reach. She didn't want to leave the water. Not yet. She listened, feet sinking into the wet sand beneath her, as Lyric spoke several runes over the water skins. Following her sister's words, a sensation brushed across Runa's skin, like the tickle from an unseen feather. Lyric held a water skin to her mouth and sipped. It's fresh, she exclaimed, holding it up triumphantly. We have water! Kel cheered, and Elena smiled, clapping her hands. Runa, feeling cold, turned back to the ocean. Why did magic work for Lyric, but not her? Was she doing something wrong? Jealousy soured her stomach, and Runa crossed her arms. She tried to ignore it and be happy for her sister's success. It was good, what Lyric had done. It was amazing, and yet... Scowling, Runa stepped out of the water. Maybe the magic didn't work because she'd been close to real death. What if returning her soul to her body had broken the connection and it'd never work for her now? Trying to distract herself and hide her face from Lyric, Runa wandered towards Kel. He'd collected driftwood with their mother and fashioned several spears, sharpening them with a knife he'd procured from somewhere. He'd also woven a fishing pouch to tie to his waist and started on a large basket. Here, Kel said, catching Runa's eye as she drew close. He gave her a handful of rockweed ropes. I was about to show Elena how to weave crab baskets. Do you want to help? Nodding curtly, Runa took the offered strips of rockweed and watched Kel as he demonstrated how to make the baskets. She was familiar with weaving, and Kel's method was quite similar to hers. The rockweed was slicker than the dried reeds she'd used, but her fingers found the rhythm quickly. Normally I'd bait the baskets with pieces of meat, Kel said. He glanced at their discarded food. Maybe we'll be lucky and something will wander into one. He showed them how to attach floats for marking the basket's locations, using the leathery orb-shaped bladders from the large fronds of seaweed washed up on the beach. Lyric came over, having set their waterskins down near their packs, and she helped them carry the baskets into the water. They waded out as far as they could and buried the baskets along a chain of submerged rocks. Kel waded back to the shore and tied a rockweed pouch to his belt, then retrieved the spears. He offered one to Runa, who took it. She rubbed her fingers over the coarse wood. She'd never used a spear before, though she supposed it was like a pitchfork. She hefted it in one hand. There was no heavy end to unbalance it. The wooden spear was light and mobile. Runa expected that if she threw it, it'd sail far before hitting the ground. Runa watched Kel as he fished, studying how his body stilled as he stared into the water. He looked poised, yet loose, like a cat waiting to pounce. Kel thrust suddenly with his spear, pulling it from the water with a silvery fish impaled on its end. Grinning, he held it up and looked at Lyric, who smiled. Jubilant, Kel tucked the fish into his waist pouch. He stabbed his spear back into the water and caught another fish and another, quickly outpacing them all. Runa glanced at Lyric and Elena. Compared to Kel, their movements were inelegant and clumsy. Kel was fluid and relaxed, as though a childhood memory had returned, guiding him. Fascinated, but also annoyed at his success, Runa looked at her feet. She could see her toes pale beneath the water, grains of dark sand pushing up between them. She looked for a flash of silver, a sign that a fish was nearby, but nothing swam close. You must have fished this way hundreds of times as a child, Lyric called out to Kel. Runa kept her eyes down, watching for fish, glaring at the empty water as it swirled cold and hungry around her knees. When one finally came, she was so surprised that she almost stabbed her foot. She cursed, splashing, and the fish darted away. Runa tried several more times without success. Luck, it seemed, wouldn't favor her today. Rue, let's go in, Lyric called. Looking up, Runa saw the sun had sunk halfway into the ocean, delineating the horizon with a glowing line of orange. She hadn't noticed the light slipping away. Lifting the spear onto her shoulder, Runa ground her teeth and followed Lyric and Kel back to the beach. Elena must have given up a while ago, since she was sitting next to a fire. Lyric bounded towards their mother, excitedly holding up a fish she'd caught. She turned to Kel, proud of his success, and together they showed Elena his filled pouch. Look at this, Lyric said, as Runa walked up to the firelight. Lyric gestured as Kel emptied the fish into a basket beside Elena. Look how many Kel caught. It was like magic. No magic, Kel said, laughing, just luck. No, Lyric said, shaking her hand. You have your own magic. She grinned at him, bright and foolish. Annoyed, Runa stabbed her spear into the sand and sat down beside the fire. Her irritation grew as their mother gave her a thoughtful look. You don't know what I'm thinking, Runa thought childishly. Well done, Kel, Elena said. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We have food for our journey now. She grabbed a piece of dried seaweed and chewed it, reaching for a stick to poke at the fire. We can cook the fish on the spits, she said, spreading out the hot coals and gesturing at several thin pieces of sharpened driftwood. You've been busy, Lyric said. Yes, I admit fishing isn't something I particularly enjoy. Elena smiled and held up a sharp stick. I'm quite good at carving, though. Kel, maybe if you could... Sure, Kel said. He held out his hand and Elena passed him her knife. Kneeling, Kel grabbed a fish and swiftly killed it with the butt of the knife. He gutted it, then passed the prepared fish to Lyric, who slid it onto a skewer. Runa, shoving aside her dark mood, held out a hand for another fish and mirrored Lyric's movements. She glanced at Elena, still chewing seaweed. Had their mother suddenly become squeamish about cooking meat? Runa remembered her killing and dressing rabbits, though Elena had taught her and Lyric to do it themselves when they were quite small. Maybe her aversion had always been there, and Runa had never been aware of it. Was Runa too hard on their mother for leaving? She'd raised them to be strong and self-reliant, and encourage their independence. That was good, wasn't it? Or had she sought to prepare them for eventual abandonment? Maybe Elena never wanted children and resented being trapped in their little valley. Runa's mood soured again, and she stabbed the fish-laden spit into the sand. She leaned forward, forearms across her knees, and drew in a heated breath from the fire. "Why are you chewing sea lettuce, Mama?" Lyric asked suddenly. "The seaweed will replenish my blood," Elena said. "Magic drains you, remember?" She sighed. "If you're going to practice magic, I suggest drying some yourself and carrying it with you. Seaweed's easier to get than red meat, especially here by the ocean. The stalk is tough. You'll need to strip the leaves." Runa glanced at Elena. Something to remember, she thought. Despite her troubles with magic, she wasn't ready to give up. Eventually, all the fish were gutted and cooking over the fire. Lyric passed around the water skins, and everyone took a tentative sip of the purified water, marveling at the taste. Runa had tasted the sea when a wave splashed into her face, and she was relieved that Lyric's water was fresh and not brackish. "An invaluable spell," Elena said. "You can't drink the sea. Too much salt." "Have you used this spell before?" Lyric asked. Elena shook her head. "I've never had need before. If I had to, I would cobble something together with the runes I know, but that's always risky." She paled as if she regretted what she'd said. Throat clearing, Elena shifted one of the spits over the fire. Runa studied their mother curiously, thinking about her words. You could create your own spells? What else was possible? Irritation still crackled along her jaw like a toothache that wouldn't go away, so despite her desire to know more, Runa kept her thoughts to herself. After a while, everyone lapsed into a comfortable silence, listening to the fire and inhaling the scent of cooking meat. Elena and Kel turned the spits, making sure both sides of the fish browned equally, until finally Kel declared them done and removed them from the coals. Together they separated the fish they'd prepped for travel, then each took one for their evening meal. The sun had disappeared into the sea by the time they started eating, and night unfurled deep and dark overhead. Elena added more driftwood to the fire, bringing it back to life and sending sparks into the sky, drawing Runa's eyes up to the tiny stars appearing above. She'd always loved the night, and how the world hushed as if in collective reverence for the evening's beauty. Finding a familiar constellation, Runa followed the outline of a great bear with her eyes, smiling as she remembered the stories their mother had told her and Lyric as children. "You should sing for us," Lyric said, pulling Runa from her memories. Regretfully, Runa looked at Kel. He'd finished his fish and was leaning back on his elbows. His face glowed in the firelight, and specks of light reflected in his eyes. "You wish a song?" he asked, beaming as if Lyric had just told him he was extraordinary. "I heard you humming songs while we were in the Vale," Lyric said, smiling. She leaned next to him in a familiar way, skirted legs tucked to the side. "Come on. We have to know if you're good or not. If you truly earned that emerald pin of yours." Kel laughed and looked up, considering the stars. Finishing her fish, Runa wiped her hands, then wrapped her arms around her knees. She couldn't remember the last time she'd listened to someone sing apart from Lyric. What should I tell you?" Kel asked. "A story of the stars? A story of a sea nymph who dreamed of land?" "Dragons," Runa said. She clenched her teeth as everyone looked at her in surprise. She hadn't planned on speaking, but the idea had popped into her head unbidden. "Dragons," Kel said. "Perhaps a song about the three?" Clearing his throat, Kel started singing a scale, each tone clear and beautiful. Runa straightened, leaning towards him, drawn forward by his voice. Scenes arose in her mind with each entrancing note. She could see endless fields, castles of glass, towering mountains, and birds soaring free in sunlit skies. Runa's skin prickled, and she resisted the urge to run her hand down her arm. Lyric, eyes rapturous, leaned towards Kel, her hand mere inches from his leg in the sand. It was like she was caught in a tide, like Runa. Kel's voice trailed off, and Runa blinked, rocking back again as if a tether had been gently let go. Crossing his legs, Kel passed his eyes over each of them in turn. He seemed unaware of his effect on them. Drawing breath into his lungs, Kel began to sing. "Lords of sky, earth, and fire, lords of wing and claw, arbiters of Aerith, holders of peace, the last of mother's blood. Pale as snow, black as night stone, red like the fire they'll cleanse all. Bloodied, challenged, scarred from battle, they hold back the poisoned tide. Binding and slaying our demon invaders, setting the world alight. Weary and fading, they pass us the mantle, trusting we'll keep towards the light. Old grudges flare as they pass into slumber. War once more rolls across the land. No longer guarded by divine creators, we're now free to inspire or fall. Eyes turned away, the lords wait in shadow, dreaming until called forth again. Though distant and sleeping, they'll return to preserve us, ever the guardians of man. Lords of sky, earth, and fire, lords of wing and claw, Eyes turned away, the lords wait in shadow, waiting to return to Aerith's light. Runa took a deep, shuddering breath as Kel's voice echoed and faded in the darkness. She hadn't realized she'd stopped breathing. She stared at Kel, trying to reconcile the youthfulness of his face with the power and magic of his voice. There'd been a presence, Willie sang, as though something big and unknowable, something celestial, had turned its eye upon them to listen. The heavy awareness slipped away as Runa sucked another breath into her lungs, and she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see something there. All she saw were the dark waves, glinting with moonlight and lapping against the sand. "That was beautiful," Lyric cooed. "Your voice. Honestly, you could have sung about folding laundry, and I still would have been mesmerized." She grinned, hair falling over one cheek. "I suppose that's good?" Kel asked, laughing. Runa was surprised that she didn't feel compelled to roll her eyes or make a snide remark. She agreed with Lyric. Kel's voice was something rare. She studied him appraisingly. He was pretty, that was true, but she hadn't expected such a powerful singing voice could exist in someone so young. There was something old about how he sang, as if he'd had centuries of study. Obviously, he'd been instructed well in the Radiant Hall, but his voice was not pure training alone. Kel had been born with an understanding of music. "It was beautiful," Runa said, drawing Kel's eyes. "Thank you." Kel looked surprised. "I wonder what would make the old ones return," Lyric said. "They didn't come when Fen disappeared. What are they waiting for? Are they waiting? Or was their promise to our ancestors a departing kindness and nothing more, like a parent on their deathbed telling a child they'll see them again, will always be with them?" Runa glanced at Elena before she could stop herself. Their mother was staring at her, her eyes hurt, regretful. And before Runa could unravel what she saw, Elena turned her head away and reached for something beside her knee. Her hair swooped over her face, and she took a slow, controlled breath. "It was a beautiful song, Kel," Elena said. Was there a slight tremor in her voice? "Thank you, Elena," he said. "Sereth wasn't mentioned at all," Lyric said. "Is it a Rendesharan song?" Kel nodded. Beth Senamera composed it 100 years ago. She was a favored songsmith of the Scorched Court, and likely sought to avoid ruffling any royal feathers. "We should sleep," Elena said. "Rest for tomorrow. If we're lucky, tomorrow night we'll be in an inn in Yunessa." "Should we keep watch tonight?" Lyric asked, "in case the Sireni come?" Runa opened her mouth to volunteer, but their mother beat her to it. "I'll do it," Elena said. "I need to wrap the fish for our journey." Deciding not to argue, Runa shifted the sand around to form a comfortable hollow for her body and laid down. "All right, wake me next," Lyric said. She joined Runa on her side of the fire and laid down, head lolling against Runa's shoulder, just like she did back home. Wrapped in her cloak, head pillowed on the sand, Runa stared up at the sky and thought about dragons. Her mind churned as she wondered where they'd gone and why. She wondered if they'd really come back, and what would happen if they did. No one living had seen a dragon, and she couldn't imagine the kings and queens being happy about relinquishing their authority again. When Runa finally fell asleep, it was to the sound of Lyric's even breathing as dragons soared and bellowed fire inside her mind. Runa woke feeling uneasy. There'd been no surprises during the night, no attack from the Sireni screamers, nothing alarming at all, and yet Runa's stomach felt sour and uncertain. She dreamed of creatures, big like dragons, flying over them in the dark. She dreamed of claws and blood and screams. She dreamed of Lyric dead and their mother missing. Dark thoughts for a beautiful morning, Runa thought, eyeing the cloudless sky. Kel, having woke first, had found clams and a green plant he called sea grapes that looked like tiny spheres. He checked the crab baskets and said something destroyed them in the night, shredding them to pieces. "Probably just an angry sawmouth fish," Kel said, shrugging one shoulder. Runa wasn't sure she believed him, but didn't challenge him, as she certainly wasn't an expert on marine life. Breakfast was simple and salty. Roasted fish, raw pieces of clam meat, sea grapes, and dried seaweed, washed down with purified water. The sea grapes popped as Runa chewed. She liked their peppery flavor. After eating and attending to their individual needs, Elena and Kel poured water on the coals of the fire, and everyone gathered their packs. Kel and Lyric hung back, letting Runa and Elena take the lead. Runa found herself side by side with their mother, but thankfully she wasn't talkative, her head turning back towards Lyric and Kel as they followed the coastline south. Behind them, Kel and Lyric carried on a rambling conversation as the sun climbed higher and higher into the sky. The clouds were relatively thin, the blue sky peeking through, and Runa soon grew warm enough to remove her cloak. Glancing towards the ocean on her left, Runa glimpsed a sleek gray animal bobbing in the waves. She thought she saw a whiskered snout before it slipped beneath the water, flipping a large spotted tail into the air as it dove. An ocean bird sang to her overhead, and Runa watched it, wishing she knew its name. She was grateful for the distraction. Why didn't anyone move down here after the Thendon cities were destroyed? Runa asked aloud. I'm not sure, Elena answered. Kel, who might have known, didn't seem to have heard her. He was laughing at something Lyric said. Perhaps, Elena said distractedly, looking back, it's because of the dunes here, to the west. She gestured at the mounds of sand. Farther north, the Thendons carved their cities into the cliffs. They wouldn't be able to do that down here. But if they were fleeing for their lives, why not camp here, Runa asked, or build a hut? There's fish in the water and relative safety. It seems like a place they could have resettled. Not many survived the destruction. Maybe the survivors didn't want to stay near the shore. Elena shook her head. I don't know. Maybe there's another reason. You can ask Kel. Yes, Runa said absently. Has she spoken to you again? Elena asked. What? Runa blinked and looked at their mother, not understanding. The ancestor who speaks to you. Oh, no. Runa's face pinched, and she looked ahead, not wanting Elena to see her expression. You tried to do something with fire when the flesh eater came, Elena said. It didn't work? No. Was I saying it wrong? Elena hesitated. No, not that I heard, but I was distracted. Runa gritted her teeth. It was uncomfortable discussing this with their mother, and she kept waiting for an argument to begin. She thought about Eleanor and her hand clenched, nails biting into her palms. If the ancestor truly wanted her to fail, then perhaps Elena was her best hope for honest answers. Despite what Elena felt about their mother, all the anger and pain, she didn't believe she'd purposely hurt her. Elena would never knowingly risk her life. Could it have failed because I was outside my body? Runa asked. Elena considered, her head tilting as they walked. Possible. You are the first ghost I've encountered. She smiled, and Runa smiled back automatically. Elena caught the movement, and her face relaxed, her eyes turning bright and welcoming. She looked much like she had when Runa was a child, patient, supportive, loving. Runa's chest ached, and she looked away. They'd lost so much time that they could never get back. Perhaps, Elena said tentatively, it's how you tried to use the magic. What did it feel like? Like a river, Runa said, rushing beside me, dangerous, tumultuous. I tried to reach for it, grab it, but it kept slipping away. The harder I tried, the more it evaded me. It was like trying to chase an animal. Would you say you tried to force it to do what you wanted? I suppose. That might have been the problem, Elena said. What problem? Lyric asked. Runa stopped, turning around. Her sister was staring at her, face flushed and happy. Kel, beside her, pulled his water skin from his pack and took a long drink. He wiped an arm across his forehead, shoving back his hair. When I tried to use magic, Runa said. You did? Lyric asked with surprise. Runa nodded. When the flesh eater attacked us. Oh, Lyric's face paled. You did magic, didn't you? Runa asked, furrowing her brows. In the room with the Sireni. I was distracted, but you did something with the wind, or was that Mother? That was me, Lyric said, nodding. Excitement flickered in her eyes. Was it difficult for you? A look of consideration crossed Lyric's face. No, she said slowly. It was strange and wonderful and a little scary. Lyric grinned. It was like I opened myself to it, let it rush through me. I thought I'd drown, but I didn't. Elena nodded. Lyric let it move through her. She relaxed. You cannot force or control the energy. It wants to work with you. It's alive in a way, like a shy animal. You should try again, Lyric said. Runa chewed the inside of her cheek. Could it be that easy? She didn't like the idea of giving control to something she didn't understand. How could she relax and let it do what it wanted? What did it want? What was it? Grimacing, Runa wrenched back her spiraling thoughts. It wasn't like magic could do anything on its own. It had to create what she wanted. Runa had to name the runes first for anything to happen. Taking a breath and trying to ignore everyone staring at her, Runa raised her palm. She stared at her hand, at the space above her skin, and spoke the word for fire. An awareness of power came over her, and it shifted inside her chest like an animal in the dark. The magic had heard her call, but was hesitant to come. It's safe, Runa thought, trying to be calm, to relax and let it flow naturally. For a moment, the notion that the magic felt alive seemed utterly ridiculous, but she shoved that reflection away and focused on remaining serene and non-threatening. The power flared, growing brighter, humming excitedly. Runa took a deep breath and held it, then let the air rush out of her lungs. She ignored everything but the awareness of her body softening, her muscles relaxing, as she let herself trust the magic. Imagining a tiny flame above her palm, Runa spoke the word for fire. Excitement filled her as orange-red flames sparked into life in the air above her skin. It was small and guttered in the wind, but it was hers. A huge smile spread across Runa's face. She wasn't broken. She could summon magic. And I think that we will stop there since this was a bit of a long chapter. So next reading, we will continue with chapter 10, which is Elena's perspective, their mother. Oh, sorry. I have my my phone stacked on top of this old library book cart and knocked into it with my foot. So I had some thoughts while I was reading of things that I wanted to say. Firstly, I did not attempt to sing the song that Cal sang. I do like to sing, but I actually did not create the music behind the words. I just couldn't decide how I wanted it to sound, and I mean, I don't write music, so but someday I think it would be really cool if somebody actually put that to music and helped me create the actual song, because that would be incredible. I love when people do that. Do that for books where they take the song and then they actually have the song that you can listen to. I think it's really cool. So yeah, I was going to say that. And then, sorry if you can hear my cat meowing. The other thing that I wanted to say is just to show you on the map where Lyric and Runa and Elena and Kel are now, since they have finally left the Vale. So, sorry, hopefully that's not too wobbly. So they've come out somewhere around here, and the Tainted Shore is this area, and that is where people don't live anymore. And they're heading down south, down into Olaporia. That's their planned destination. But if they were to keep going, then it becomes very dangerous. So we'll see what happens. And then the Sea of Screams was mentioned and has been mentioned before. And then Habaria's Heart has also been mentioned, which is the sea on the other side of the continent. Oops, sorry about the hand there. Anyway, so yeah, I think that those were the main thoughts that I had that I wanted to talk about. And then, I don't know if this kind of stuff interests you, but I grew up along the coast of Northern California. And so I have a particular love for the sea and the beach and everything, and finding shells and standing in cold water. And so that was probably evident by having the fun of Lyric and Runa going to stand in the ocean that they had never seen before, because where they grew up, and they didn't leave where they grew up either, and so they've never seen an ocean before. Anyway, okay, getting too rambly about this. So hopefully you enjoyed today's reading, and if all goes well, I will return next week to do the next chapter. So yeah, well, I am now going to go back to working on the third book, the final book, and hope that you have a wonderful weekend. All right, see you next time.